Hi, everybody. I'm Scott, and thanks for joining us again today for another episode of the RockLove Podcast, where we celebrate the magazine that ran from 1995 to 2001, reflecting on the music of the times, as well as current music and trying to discover what's available today. We always end each show with taking a look back at one of the old RockLove Magazine episodes and taking a look at what was happening during that time, which connects to what we're going to do today. And I've asked an old friend, Jeff Becker, back again. Hey, man, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see you again, and looking forward to this episode. Lots of change going on during these years, so be fun.
Yeah. This, it's the post-nirvana years. So what
Yep.
we're going to talk about are the actual rock love years. And I said to Jeff, let's come up with a half dozen each of our favorite albums from that 95 to 2001 era. For me, it's pretty simple because it's all shit that's in the magazine, right? Like when I gave you the topic, I'm like, I pretty much knew what they were off the top of my head. So I'm sure you put a little more thought into yours than I did. Not that mine are bad. Like I said, they just rolled off for me. So, okay. So let me start, and I'll do my first one. So the magazine began in 1995, and we were a little zine. It was black and white. I mean, I look back at it now and laugh. It was hardly professional at all. But what we started doing was what you do, which was finding out who all the publicists were, getting in touch with them, telling them you existed. 97% of them don't give a shit about you, especially when it came to big bands and bands that that they didn't need you for in the least. And this is that you could look at the zines as the influencers of the day, right? It's sort of like what influencers are today, but but zines didn't have the respect that influencers had today, because once you became large enough to be quote unquote an influencer, then you were like a real magazine and not a zine anymore. So it was this really gray area that the whole thing existed in. So we started putting out the word to these publicists that we're there and we existed, and most of them ignored you, or the ones that do start sending you stuff start sending you their B things, and their C things, and the things that, like I said, that you know Spin and Rolling Stone might not even cover because they may not have the room to get to it. And so that is how we discovered what became our first great find of the magazine in 1995. And it was the debut album of a Santa Barbara band. The hit single on this album was the biggest single of 1995, a song about a female god. And we became very we became very enamored with these guys. They look good, they had that Santa Barbara sexiness and flowing hair, and they wore colorful clothes, and the lead singer J.R. Richards was extremely charismatic. And so their first album, which is called Pet Your Friends, which is by the band Dishwalla, captivated us from the first opening riffs of this album. And a lot of people look at this album. I've heard everything from candy popped. I can't think of all the derogatory terms I've heard about this album. And sure, it's not Led Zeppelin, but boy, there's great crunch on every track on this album. In fact, that big hit, Counting Blue Cars, Tell Me All Your Thoughts on God, is far from the best song of on the album. There's the song called Haze. There's the song called Give, Give is a fabulous tune. There's a song I loved called Charlie Brown's Parents, where they did that. They did on a synthesizer that imitation of, remember, Charlie Brown's Teacher, the parents went
Be
piece
yeah,
of that.
of course.
It has that kind of going on through the guitar synth or something in the background. And it is a fabulous album from start to finish. Um, Unfortunately, this band, they had a second album that was just as good, if not better. In fact, the second album was so popular that when it came out, 97 or 98, whenever it was, that was that you would go to the movies and that was the album that was playing around the country and like in every movie theater. I imagine it's some sort of paid promotion, but it catapulted that album to being even bigger than the debut album. But so at the end of 1995, when we picked going into 1996, who our favorite bands of the year were, Dishwalla was at or near the top. Another thing they did, I don't know if anybody remembers, there was an album. Let's see, what year was that? I think it was right before this album came out in '93 or '94, called "If I Were a Carpenter," where a bunch of rockers did Carpenter songs, including like Sonic Youth did this crunchy "Yesterday Once More," and Dishwalla did one of the songs on that album, and it really
Dishwalla, I mean, I actually like that band a lot.
tell you, it happened. That song, as you recall, hit the radio. You know, again, we're still back in the days of radio stations, and that song was played 20 times a day. You know, every hour on the hour, and almost every pop station and rock station around the country.
Yeah, I remember the guitar player. I mean, in the guitar magazines was written, because I got so popular, he was written up.
You know, then
Yes.
then they started changing players, and the whole thing fell apart. But J.R. Richards is still out there performing live and doing shows, and he puts out an album or two, or he redoes these songs acoustically, which are magnificently beautiful and melancholic when you like hear this stuff stripped down to what would you give stripped down to its core, and yeah. So that would Dishwalla's Pit Your Friends. If you don't know it, go check it out. And I don't know how you wouldn't know it if you were around at the time, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was just so popular, and but yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. It's funny because when you asked me to do this, it brought up so many memories of songs. So not so much albums, but songs because of all. It was just so much music and the whole MP3 world and CDs and vinyl was kind of not really happening at the time. And in my life, I was changing. I was going from these two retail crazy, careers into technology and meeting people that were into all kinds of music at the time. There was a company I was working for called Mind Leaders in that I right after my retail experience with the company that you and I worked for, and then another one, I was in a big box sneaker store. And I remember when I joined that company, we had these giant TV screens and music videos and music pumped through the store, but it was all pop music. So all day long, as we're building these stores and customers are coming, I'm hearing pop music. And then I'm getting in my car and I'm listening to what we're going to talk about. What was I into? What was I hearing back in those days that rock love, was in business. So I'm going to start off with,
Okay, well, hold on.
Yeah.
Before you go, though,
Yeah.
I just want to say, and let's remember, 95 and 90, Kurt Cobain died in 1994. So in 1995 and 96, the music industry is really, and this is just going to what you said about all these songs putting out there, trying to find who's next, what comes next. Now, Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and the other grunge bands are still there, but the grunge thing literally disintegrated with this guy's death. So that's why you have all, everything from the Dishwallas to Sponge and all these bands that are trying to fill this void, and create this new thing, which was impossible to do because the grunge thing was a once in a generation type of thing.
Yep, exactly. So, okay, that's a good segue into this because I
It
love
wasn't even planned. We didn't talk about
no, we didn't. But it's funny because some of the bands you mentioned are ones that I was at that time I was still listening to. I was actually when reason I'm giving you the backstory is when I joined that company and I'm listening to all this different music that people in the company were listening to, and I also got my first taste back on the stage playing in a band, and it was a cover band. So of course, not only did we do all the old stuff, but we were trying to do some of the new stuff. But my first one has to be hands down STP. And I know it was a little before that, but it was right in that 90, 5-ish to 2001, 96. These,
That was so that was my seventh. So we would have had an order
okay.
if I'd have bumped to
Yeah.
that. But yeah,
So,
that was one of the first bands, like big bands, I covered live in San Jose that I got a press pass and photo pass for and everything. And they were magnetic performers, really really charismatic on stage.
fantastic, fantastic. And
Are you talking the first album or the second album?
well, at the time, the first album was before Rock Love, right? But
So it's
I was still listening. Yeah, Interstate Love Song, that was 94-ish, 93, 94. But I started really getting into them. So every time a CD at that time would come out, I'd be jumping on that, right? And I would gravitate to some of the songs that were, first of all, the guitar playing and the bass playing, the DeLeo brothers, if you don't know. Dean DeLeo is just, he was a rock star, right? He looked the part. He had the Les Paul. His brother Robert was a fantastic musician who probably, I think, wrote most of the songs. And as a rock player, the 3 or 4 chords that you play, even though it sounded grungy and hard rock, there were a lot of really cool, interesting chords in the songs that they were performing. Minor sevenths, major sevenths, and you can hear it in those songs if you listen. I was more of a instrumental listening rather than the words. You were probably more into the words, right? Um, so I would listen to how those songs were put together, and I loved their melodies. I loved the way that they wrote songs and put in these great chord structures, and I just fell in love with the band. I thought they were great. Obviously, Scott Weiland was a phenomenal front man,
Tragic figure.
and yeah, and I remember also I was working with a guy that was working on my team was from Latroy, is it Pennsylvania, where the beer? What's the anyway, they were playing a big festival, and I remember him getting me some fantastic video of them as well, but just fantastic songs. Even like Sour Girl, like there are songs that I still go back and listen and say, I can't believe how good this was, right? But we grew up in that time in those not late 90s. There was so much happening. You had all this great, like you said, grunge music still around. Then you had all these bands that were putting out different types of music, like the next evolution of grunge. It was just almost overkill, right? Because then I still loved all the old stuff, but I was trying to say, what am I really into and why, right? And that's the why is because of my musical background, and I love that it was just really good. If you go back to their first album, like Sex Type Thing, the first time I heard that, I'm like blown away. It was just thumping, da na 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 na. I mean, just a great line, a great riff opening to that song, and I fell in love with that band, and I continued to, you know, listen and probably be one of my favorite artists all through that period of time that we're talking about. And I saw them live at what was called Rock on the Range, in Columbus, Ohio. I might have told you this story, but I had some connections where we were backstage for everything. I got spoiled. I didn't want front row seats. I wanted to be on the stage. That's what I was used to. And for Stone Temple Pilots, we were right there. We were sitting above just watching them, and it was so awesome. It was like it was a dream. It's like I can't believe I'm sitting on stage watching Stone Temple Pilots, who I've been listening to. And at that time, because of the job, I was in a car a lot. I was listening a lot, and it was a car, it was a travel thing, right? It wasn't work from home, wasn't go to the office. I was in different places. I was traveling all around the country. And I had my I guess MP3 player at the time, or CD player, but it was great. That band,
Great band.
hands down, hands
Yep.
down for me. Number
You know,
4, I think. The album.
Love Song. Interstate Love Song's probably on my list of top 100 favorite songs of all time. And as you said earlier, I'm big on words and lyrics. And
Yes.
to me, a great artist not only communicates with you through the music, but through the storytelling, which as a filmmaker, I love storytelling. And how many of us have not been in the car with somebody, with a loved one, having a fight, driving to or from somewhere, which is what that whole song, like you immediately connect with it on every level. And then you have that screaming guitar that keeps going up in pitch to raise and lower the emotion and whatnot. I mean,
I
it's just a
mean,
beautifully done piece.
unbelievable. So that was the Purple album that you're
Yep,
talking
yep,
about,
yep.
Interstate. And that one, even in 96, which was a year and a half, 2 years after the release, I was all over that album because in the band we were playing the first band that I started in those eras, we started acoustically. And I remember going to this little club and playing with me and the lead singer, Jim Marriott. And we got up on stage and he was an okay guitar player, but I was playing all the licks to Interstate. Near, 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 that whole intro and
Oh,
everything. And it was just
good.
me and him with two guitars sitting on a stage, playing in an open mic. That's when we formed the band. And I was like, so that means a lot. Like that song stuck with me all those years because we kept it in our set list, during the 90s.
And then if you go back to, that album is coming off of the core album, which was huge also, which was, I always thought amazing because it took this song Plush, which was an extremely hard, crunchy song. And as you
Love
recall,
that one too.
it became the most popular MTV Unplugged track for a couple of years. It got played over and over and over once it got slowed down with an acoustic guitar. So yeah, great choice for it. All righty. Okay, so my next one, which I also think is a great choice, and my next one is about how life comes around in circles. I guess you could call it karma in a way, and how things change. And I say that because this was the band that was the Rock Love band of 1996. This is another album that every song on this album is spectacular. This is somebody from the 27 Club, unfortunately, though. And why I say it comes back around now is because even though the guys continued on without Bradley and tried this thing with this guy, Rome, which was great and respectable, now 30 years later, this guy's son, Jacob, is a young man with a voice that sounds just like his father. And Sublime is back out on the road with this new singer and Eric and Bud. And so in 1996, again, a band that had huge punk cred. I was not really into punk, but when this album came out, I remember the publicist calling me about this and saying, from the things I see you do in Rock Love, you will love this. There's some couple of tracks on there that are very Beatles sounding. In fact, one of the songs, which of the songs was it? Dude, one of the songs like literally sounds like it has a Lady Madonna thing going on underneath it, the way like Tears for Fears used yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so, so this second Sublime album, which had What I Got, Santeria, Rock.
Yeah.
It's like
Those,
Wrong Way. It's one after
I
another, and so
I
this is what
love
turned
that.
me on. Yeah, and this
Yeah.
is what turned me on to this ska thing, this punky ska thing. It also reignited my love in going back to reggae and revisiting all the reggae stuff I loved. And I started listening to Bob Marley and Peter Tosh and Michael Rose and all those people more. In fact, Michael Rose is a big contributor in Rock Love. He was putting out stuff prolifically then. But I just thought this album had this, like I said, this level of punk ethos combined with the reggae dub thing, which is just the bass lines of reggae are extremely attractive, right, to any
Oh
ear.
yeah.
And
Just
then
a
the whole
groove. It's a funk groove. It's great. That's great music.
and on
Great.
stage they were insane. They had a different type of energy. It was a lot more in your face. The guy has
Oh,
his Dalmatian the Dalmatians running back and forth out on stage. And I think I told you this story once before. Unfortunately, like a week or a month or something after we saw them and at this ski festival at Big
yeah.
Bear Mountain in California, we were going to see them again in San Francisco, and he was found dead in his hotel room that day. So, but a great album. Again, that was Rock Love's album and band of our second year in 1996.
That's first of all, what a great one. That's a good pick. Also on our set list, both of those songs from Sublime. Yeah, just great stuff there. Groovy, fun to play, by the way, and listen to. So I'm giving you the other side of like being a player or saying, I like that. That sounds good. Let me try to play that. I mean, over and over in my head, that was playing my card too, but not on my list, but it should be. There's so many, like when we're talking, I'm like, oh, I forgot that one. I forgot this one, right? Because as I started, it was a lot of songs, right? And there was at that time, there wasn't any streaming going on, right? It was Apple Music, it was downloading music, it was CDs in your car, and it was what you said earlier, the radio. So what was playing on the radio, and whether you had like here we have, like everywhere, right? Yeah, the hard rock station, classic rock, and the alternative. I tended to go more towards the hard rock and alternative, right? For obvious reasons. Um, but that was a fantastic band. So what I'm going to tell you next, it kind of goes along to what you said also early about Nirvana and how these grunge bands, it was the beginning of the end, or some of them hung around. Someone who I really, really loved, right? And he kind of fucked up at the end. You'll know who I'm talking about when I say Dave Grohl and what he did recently. But I loved his energy. I love that he was such a great musician that people only knew him as the drummer before Foo Fighters. And I'm talking
The
about the Foo Fighters now.
versatility he proved once that band came out.
I am, I, I don't know if you've seen like any of the documentaries on the Foo Fighters or the Soundstage Studio movie. I don't know if you've seen any of that where he goes and he buys the board from the old, 70s Mac stuff. I'll send you a link. You can put it out for people. If you haven't seen it, you want to see it, because if you love music, if you're a Foo Fighters fan, or if you're just a rock fan, you're going to want to see how they recorded and the types of equipment they used. But anyway, I loved what he did on that first album, even though it was before that. But I became a fan. And during that time, they were releasing albums a lot. And at that time that he was putting his band together for tour, unfortunately, right, what happened to Taylor Hawkins, but those two were like Page and Plant in a way. I say that because there's certain bands that have that, the two guys come up to the front, even though Foo Fighters have some super talented musicians in there, as you know.
Yeah, but can I tell you something? They went on Howard Stern a lot, and every time I think about Taylor, it's so sad, because when I think about these appearances on Howard Stern, he was the most charming, sweet, lovely man.
These were guys that we would hang out. I know. That's what I'm saying. No attitude, humble, like respectful, just a nice guy, so was Dave Grohl until you really found out about what he was doing, I mean.
Yeah, it brings tears to my eyes thinking about it. So.
Yeah, right? I mean, so again, that era for me was so guitar influenced, because of what I was doing, right? Because of what I was into back then. So the Everlong song, that's, you're talking about, that was a 97 album, I think, that they came out, 96, 97, 98, somewhere around there. Monkey Wrench. Those songs were just, I could, you listen, it's like, how are they writing these songs? My Hero, right? You talk about Howard Stern when he did Everlong. I couldn't wait to learn that song. And it's an interesting tuning. It's really easy. It's just a drop D. If you know what that is, if your guitar players out there, you drop the D and then you have a really nice chord that you're playing. And when you play it, it sounds just like the song. So that song I was not only playing, I was listening to the album over and over and over. And that was just, it was also front and center to everything I was into back then. Like another band that I'll talk about, after, I just kept waiting for at the time, because we didn't have, the streaming and things were immediate. You had to wait till it actually got released and either played on the radio or you went to your favorite, CD shop at the time and you bought it. Right. But you'd get like little snippets of stuff that were coming out. There were a lot of these MP3 Underground. I can't remember half the names of things that I would try to get. Like, what are they doing? Hey, is this a real studio recording? Remember all that whole time when people were like sneaking studio recordings off the boards, and they were terrible, but they were good stuff. that actually got released. So I'm gonna have to say The Color and Shape for me is my
Great
second album,
choice.
which happens to be their second album. And again, I think the year is, correct me if I'm wrong, 97-ish.
97-ish, yeah. A great, that's like I said, a great choice. And then again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, talk about taking a power chord song and taking that all down and stripping it down to like a gorgeous acoustic tune that was debuted on
Yes,
Howard Stern, if I'm not
exactly.
mistaken. And
Exactly. Scott, this is what I'm saying. Like the way that STP and Foo Fighters were able to change the tunings and use some of these great chords that you said gorgeous sounding. Um, I was really attracted to that, right? That's why I love that, because it was still hard rock. It was still high energy, but it was also beautiful. So beautiful stuff. Like you could play Everlong hard, you could play it acoustic nuts,
that's just amazing.
That's what's great. Yeah.
Great
Is it
choice.
like
Great
the
choice.
era? I can't remember if the era of MTV Unplugged, that
Yeah.
might have been right around that time, because that was a show that, again, I think it was 92 to 7 maybe was the highlight of that show.
Yeah, and that show changed it changed the perception of albums and acts and gave them second life, second shelf lives in a different
For
vein,
sure.
right? By when you took those Nirvana songs and stripped them down, like look, Alice in Chains, like look what it did to that stuff.
Phenomenal.
How like I said, how you're able gives you a different light to look at it in. So and to this day,
Well,
people are still doing that.
exactly. What was interesting about the MTV Unplugged, some of these songs, like, you'd figure them out and they sounded good and you play in the band and it sounds good. And then you watch them on the Unplugged and they changed the arrangement. And it was even better. It's like, whoa. And they put like strings in, especially Nirvana did that when they did their Unplugged. That was 94, I think, or 90, right before he passed. But that was amazing. uh, you know, I'm looking at it like, what are they doing? Like, what are those are awesome, right? So a lot of these bands that were considered that, rock, hard rock, even Soundgarden, these bands really had some beautiful melodic, structure to the way they were writing the music. And a lot of people didn't realize that if you didn't play a musical instrument, you're just listening, you're like, okay, it's got a good groove, but it was a lot going on behind the scenes there.
Well, correct me if I'm
Especially with
wrong,
Foo
but
Fighters.
if you're not a musician, for those of us that aren't musicians, like most songs, you start off, writing your song on just piano or on just guitar, right? So it's not this
Right.
big live crunchy band thing, and then you arrange the tune. So just the idea of it's like going back to where the track began, which is how you wrote it. So great
Exactly.
choice, great choice. Okay, my next one. Let's see, what are we on? My third one. Um, is one of my favorite albums still to this day. And this is a little mine start to go except I've got one more big commercial one, but my last three of my last four choices start to go off the beaten path a little bit. And this is just the
Okay.
beginning of it. Although this is still a commercial album. These guys are from Boston. It's really though about the one guy who's the leader of the band. And I love this album so much that when we said, okay, we're finally selling enough of these RockLove magazines that we can go color. And so the first thing we did was we did just a color cover. And then we got to the point where we said, okay, now we're doing well enough. Like, let's make the whole friggin' thing color, which added a whole nother level of complexity. Again, we're a zine, and I'm trying to live somewhere between this zine world and magazine world, which was probably the biggest mistake I made. I should have picked one or the other.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, so when we went to go and do a full color issue and color cover for the first time, this album was just coming out. Let's see, this came out in 19, October of 1996. And
Mhm.
so I contacted the guys from the label and from the publicist for the label, and I said, I know it's Rock Love and we're not that big and blah, 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 but I love this album. I love this guy. I'm from Boston. He's from Boston. Um, and I want him to be my first color cover, but I must have a photo shoot with him in order. I'm not taking your press photo and putting that on the cover of my color magazine. And they reluctantly agreed. And so we had a couple of professional photographers we worked with at the time, and we sent one of them to take these great pictures of him. I'll put it up behind us here. And the name of this album is called Car Button Cloth, and it was the seventh studio album by this Boston band, the Lemonheads. But it was the follow-up to a very popular the album that launched them into commercial success before it, which had a song called It's a Shame About Ray on it, which I'm sure everybody has heard. And also this kind of revved up punky cover of Here's to You, Mrs. Robinson from the Simon and Garfunkel from the movie. And but this album is a fabulous, fabulous album from start to finish. And it's poppy. It's a bit alternative. It's a bit acoustic. It's a bit lyrically comical. You know, there's a song called Hospital where the lyric is, there's a disease going around the hospital, which is so true in so many ways. But it came out at a time when they were talking about like the spread of superbugs and whatnot in the hospital. So there's a disease going around the hospital. And then it has another song on there about being a city boy and not being able to go out and be out in the woods and the outdoor life. And it's just this fun album. He showed up on David Letterman's show. I don't know if it was for this album or the last one, but he showed up wearing this red, full length red fake fur coat with like long fake fur hair sticking out of it. And he looked like a total goof. And I remember like Letterman saying to him, "You need help with your wardrobe there or something." Um, and so, you know, when we said to the label, if I can get a photo shoot with Evan Dando, even though we're a little nothing scene and everything, I want to put him on the cover of the magazine and feature the Lemonheads. Because, like I say, I love, love, love this album. One of the songs, Purple Parallelogram, was co-written with Noel Gallagher, actually. So, you know, so Evan Dando is not a nothing. This is sort of like the apex, though, of the Lemonheads' mass popularity, this album and the one before it. And, you know, and they did put out some really strong albums after this, but they never recaptured what they had. Again, you're in this period in 95 and 96 and 97, like we're talking about, where after Nirvana, the labels are all looking for direction. The problem with grunge was it created this situation, in my opinion, where the labels didn't look for the next big thing. They looked for the next big genre. And that's a much bigger a bite to chew, to bite off and chew and find than to just find a one next big thing. You know, they're trying to find this whole genre of people. And like I said, I think, especially right after the oomph and the power and the impact that the grunge scene had, it was a literally impossible task. And it gave bands like Dishwalla and like Sublime and like STP and like Lemonheads this chance to get more in the limelight than they might have otherwise had grunge survived, and see what they had and what they were made of. But I recommend this album, Car Button Cloth, to everybody. It's fun, it's playful, it's a little grungy and a little crunchy, and everything I love in a good record.
That's a great story. That's good. That's a good one. Fantastic. You know, am I up?
Yes, sir.
Because we haven't talked, right? But this has nothing to do with that type, you know, with that album. However, you mentioned Boston. So the next band that I was getting into in that late 90s was a band from Boston called Godsmack. And because I was into the heavy rock, I really, really liked their groove. I thought that they were just in your face, rocked out. And at the time they were getting some popular, you know, songs that, you know, on the radio play, but there were a lot of like hidden tracks on there. When you listen to it, you're like, wow, this band really cooks, man. They're rocking. And again, hearing all that, what I call drop D tuning, they used a lot of that heavy, grungy, but different now, like rock sound. That's what I was listening to back then as well. And in 99, I was lucky enough to go to Ozfest, and they were performing in Ozfest, which I got to see pretty close. And again, really blown away. Like high energy stage performance. Now, look, if you're a rock band, most rock bands, especially at the Ozfest, had energy. These guys took it like to another level. I mean, I couldn't believe Scully was his name. Scully. And he's got a documentary out too, by the way. I don't know if you saw that or you've heard about it. I don't know if it's streaming for free, but I know it's out there. And he did a whole thing about Boston and growing up in Boston, Lawrence, which you probably know how bad that is, and just how they formed Godsmack. Because I went back and said, where did this band come from? Like this guy, like it was really good stuff. Like, but he's got it, as a lot of these musicians, he has a really good story. But this was something I was listening to quite a bit, right? And I remember also having, I think it was the Woodstock CD at the time, like a double CD, and they had tons of bands. That was in '99, the whole fiasco back then. But like Collective Soul, all these great bands were on there, and they were also on there too. And I think there was a track, I think it was on that CD, if I'm not mistaken. But the Godsmack, their first release, just so, I don't know, just so good, just so rocking. I liked it a lot. So I'll say that.
You know,
We're back.
well, that's one of the things you said, which is so true about the era. Again, we're all searching for new music, right? After there's no more grunge coming out, that's so spectacular. And so, yeah, so if you found a band, you would want to go back and look at where did they come from, who influenced them, and what that would lead you to. And for me, the most perfect example of that is when you talk about Nirvana and talk about that MTV album. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I think they played two songs. The next thing you know, I'm a fucking Meat Puppets fan because I had never heard of that. And they became one of Rock Love's favorite bands too. And still to this day, I look up, go back and look for the Kirkwood brothers doing stuff live. And, so yeah, whatever we were listening to back then, we wanted to go and discover from that. So great choice. Another great choice. So, okay. So my next one, I just rearranged mine. I'm going to do my most commercial one next. And then my last two will be my most out there that hopefully nobody's heard of. And I'll be turning people on to music. So, to me, this is by far the best album of the 95 to 2000 period. This and probably that Muse album that I came to not love as much but that was the fault of radio overplaying those songs over and over. And, Nights of Lady, you couldn't hear it, and one more time after a while. But to me, this album is amongst the most creative and most genius pieces of music of that era and of any era. It's also on my list of top 100 albums of all time, along with the album that came before it. And the guitarist of this band is now the top music scorer in Hollywood, Johnny Greenwood. And so when this came out in 1997, again, I figured I didn't have a fucking chance to get this interview or to go talk to these people. But I called the publicist who was representing them at Capitol. And I said, is there any way I could do something on Radiohead and talk to these guys? You sent me the advanced copy of this album. I love every single thing about it. Pretty much every song, start to finish. I mean, it's just, like I say, it's just one of the most spectacular pieces of work that I'd ever heard from start to finish. And Paranoid Android was like the Bohemian Rhapsody of the time for me. It was that 3 songs in one concept type of thing, like Queen had done. So the guy at the label says to me, let me get back to you. I'm like, all right, that's never going to fucking happen. So we'll do what we're going to do with it, cover them live. They would always let you cover them live, right? Because that's the skin off their back to give you tickets. Sometimes you have to fight for the photo pass, but most of the time, even Little Us got it. Because, they let you up front for 3 songs, you shoot and get out of it. And by the way, something you were saying earlier about being up front and seeing people the being in that photo pit for 3 songs was like the most fun I ever had because you're right there and you're right under there.
It's a different experience.
It's a different experience. So anyway, so the guy calls me back from the label and he goes, guess what? I got good news for you. If you're willing to come down to the Capitol Tower, the famous round tower in Hollywood, They're going to do a press day there, and you can have a half hour with them. And you know what? If you want to bring your photographer, you can have 5 minutes to shoot them. And so we go down, and again, I was in love with these guys. And I also was aware of how difficult that they could be press-wise, because they weren't the biggest fans of the press. And I had this interview with Colin Greenwood and the drummer Phil Selwyn, and who's the bassist? Ed O'Brien was also Ed O'Brien. I had the three of them. They wouldn't let me talk to Johnny or to Tom. But so we did this great interview. And then my photographer, Jim Steinfeld, who came down, we did this shoot with them. And the reason I went and grabbed the magazine is because not only was it then the cover of the magazine, but to this day, 30 years later, and I know this is my photo because nobody else took this photo this way. And on the internet, whenever I see like Radiohead podcasts or songs or whatnot, it will often have this picture on there. I don't know if it's coming up. Put it in front of my face. I'll put it behind us so that it can be seen. But so anyway, so I had this great interview with them. Like I said, Johnny Greenwood now has become, like between him and Trent Reznor are both like the two best music scorers in Hollywood now. And but that's not the end of the story. So then that's the apex of my day. Okay, then my day goes south because I go home and I get off the plane in San Jose and I go to the parking lot and I can't find my fucking car. And I'm looking and it says 3B and I'm at 3B and and I can't find my fucking car. And this whole day is like going to shit. It's like, it was amazing how it was like a couple hours later, it was the greatest high without drugs I could have had. And now I'm like in this total panic, probably because I didn't have weed with me. So anyway, so then this guard for the parking lot guard on the golf cart finally comes around and goes, "Can I help you or something?" I'm like, "I can't find my fucking car." And he's like, I show him my ticket and everything, and he looks at it and he goes, "Oh, you're on the other side. There's 3B East and 3B West." And I was like, "God damn it, who labeled the friggin' parking lot?"
I know, right?
So then I went over to the other side, and there was my car, and all was redeemed. So that's my Radiohead story.
Wow.
But like I say, OK Computer, I think,
Yeah, good.
Harm of Police, Let Down, Subterranean Homesick, and No Surprises is a great song. Lucky, even that opening song, Airbag, has a lot of just the use of synths and like I said, on all, to me, capped by this Paranoid Android Bohemian Rhapsody like anthem. It's one of the best pieces of work I think in rock history.
I mean, yeah, I would say I would have to agree with that. Very talented musicians there as well. That's a great one. Great
All
one.
right, what you got?
All right. What am I on? 4?
You are on 4.
All right. I said this band's name, but I'll say it formally as one that I was listening to a lot and still play in a hobby band to this day is a band called Collective Soul. Just love Collective Soul. Now here's some music back. They were a little bit I think it was their second album that was probably in that 96 to 99 era. But there was this was a band that could be as mellow, but also really rocking out, like really hard. And I don't know if they got the credit that they really deserve. Maybe as people that love music might have liked them a lot, but I know I've turned on people even recently to them. They're like, "Oh yeah, I remember kind of hearing that song." It's like, well, listen to their album. Listen to their second album, which was called Collective Soul.
The
had a
brilliant
song-
album. That was a brilliant collection. I think the first 4 Collective Soul albums are all spectacular.
Right. But you're a music guy and you love it. Like there's people that might even listen to this and say, I kind of remember them, but I don't know them well enough. Well, go explore their catalog. It's really good. Like a lot of the songs that didn't get a lot of play outside of like the December of the World. I know all those classic ones, Shine, which was 94, but just some really, really good instrumental music. Words were fantastic. Good performers. They're still performing, I think, now. But just another band that I was all over during that era, waiting for the next album to come out. And just to add a little bit to this story, and I can't remember if it's right in that range, but do you remember Howard Stern had his first Private Parts movie? Was that in the late 90s? Maybe
96. Yep. 96.
96. And Collective Soul had a song on their soundtrack, and I'm like, okay, that's really good publicity. Like that, that's hot, right? Because that band wasn't getting, I didn't think at the time, the recognition that they deserve. But being on that, because Howard Stern was all about PR machine, they were there, and I remember watching the movie in the theater and hearing their song, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. I love that. So that was part of my time in that era. I was listening to them quite a bit, and I still do to this
And
day.
this too, you brought up the DeLeo brothers earlier. You
Yeah.
brought these two Roland brothers. Who else was there? There were the Robinsons, the Black Crows. What's
Yeah.
great about these bands with family members in them is that, like I think you mentioned earlier, they've probably been playing together and fighting together since they were 5 years old. So the musical tightness, and in a lot of cases, the lyrical tightness, and especially in families where the vocals the vocal tones and pitches will sound similar, like with the Gallaghers. It's just that's what's special about it to me, is that they didn't start in high school, they started long before high school. So
That's
that was always unique about these bands.
exactly. And I think that era of musicians, probably similar to our ages, um, we all grew up with that. We want to be rock stars. When you played an instrument, you wanted to be a rock star. At least those are the people I was hanging out with from a very young age. We all wanted to be on stage and play. It was everything you hear on these documentaries. It's just mind blowing to me when I hear these people in their late 50s, early 60s talk about how they started music and, what they wanted out of it. I mean, I felt like the same way. I don't know if everybody does, but that's kind of what I wanted. Um, but that's another story for another time.
Another
But that's
Collective
yeah,
Soul, another great band of the time. They're still out there touring. They're here in
yeah.
Vegas at least once a year. I saw them a couple of years ago. They're still spectacular. Unfortunately, it's now a grocery store. But there was a nightclub called the Edge nightclub in Palo Alto when we were doing Rock Love. And what was great was we lived in Palo Alto, and you could literally just go downtown. And I think we could walk there and go see. I saw so many bands there, including Collective Soul was one of them. And like I said, the place is a grocery store now. It's kind of sad to drive by them. So great choice. All right, for my last two, I hope, Jeff Becker, I'm going to turn you and everybody watching and listening onto a couple of bands to go check out. If you know one or either of these two bands, I'll do them one at a time. Then kudos to you just for knowing them. So when we're doing the magazine, you would get, as I've said, you get albums, you get CDs sent to you get all this press shit sent to you. You want to go see people touring, people coming to these clubs. And I get sent this album and I listened to it and it was really good. It was kind of hard rock. You would love it if you like Godsmack. You will love this album. Very crunchy, very hard rocky, a little bit of DJ stuff in it, but nothing like Sublime or anything like that. And it just so happens that the lead singer of this band is the lead backup singer for the Rolling Stones for the past 30 or 40 years, a guy by the name of Bernard Fowler. And if you go look him up, you will see he is the backup singer for the Stones. He is the reason Mick Jagger sounds so good live in concert, quite frankly, because Bernard has a magnificent voice. So Bernard hooked up with this guy by the name of Stevie Salas, who he met in California. And they formed this band called Nickelbag. Not Nickelback, Nickelbag with a G, like a nickel bag of
I
weed.
almost got nervous when you
So,
said that.
nope, no, because I'm not a big
I know.
and so they put out this album. Speaking of drug nickel bag, they put out this album called "It's and a Bump," which is an incredible album. They even do a cover of "Hit It and Quit It" by Funkadelic on that album, which they do great.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I mean Dave Abruzzese, was the original drummer for Pearl Jam, plays on a song or two. I mean, really great songs. Bernard, like I say, has a magnificent voice, and so we got to know him a little bit. We hung out with them a couple of times at shows and after shows. I think we had a meal or two with them, and just the nicest, sweetest guy, and so into what he was doing, and so thankful and appreciative of having this opportunity to be able to step out of the limelight of the biggest, touring rock band in the history of the world, um, and to be able to take a stab at it themselves. And they were playing in tiny little clubs, like the Edge in Palo Alto, or bottom of the hill in San Francisco. These 2 to 500 seat clubs, and great sets with incredible energy. And like I said, Bernard has a magnificent voice, good enough to be the lead backing male singer for the Stones for 35 years.
Can you stream that anywhere? I mean, it's kind of an underground.
Sure, you can go. No. It was put out by Iguana Records, which was a pretty good sized, B or C level label back then. So yeah, it's called Two Hits and a Bump by Nickelbag. If you go look it up, I'm sure it's out there. You can find it. So
put the link out for everyone. That sounds like I'm gonna definitely try to check it.
Great record, and like I say, he has a great voice. It's totally different than Stones music. It's much more akin to that crunchy Godsmack type of sound you were talking about, and I bet you and everybody else who doesn't know Nickelback will dig that album. And that came out in April of '96.
Love it, man, love it. That's fantastic. You gonna do another one? You want me to go?
Go for your next one, and then I'll do my last one.
All right, my next one has a lot to do. Again, during that time, I was in a retail business. I was in the sneaker business, and we were building 25, 30,000 square foot stores. It was called Just for Feet. And they were just giant stores, as I said, with big, giant TV screens and music blaring. And there was one song that I always heard, but I wound up really liking this guy and finding out he was super talented. You're probably going to know as soon as I say it. His name was Beck. And there was a song that it just was playing in my head, but it was one of those songs that it didn't bother me because I couldn't get enough of it. And there's something about the groove of where it's at that I liked it because it was different than just a rocks. It wasn't really a rock, so it was kind of rap. It was very rappy.
Well, there's a Beatles underbeat on that too, if I'm not mistaken. Like literally lifted from the Beatles. So
it could be on where it's at. I mean, it's got such a great bass line.
Great.
I mean, when you explore Beck and all the songs that he's put together over the years, super talented musician. But he was certainly a lot of the stuff he did during that era I was listening to, and the stuff before that. But that album, that Odelay, was just in my head because as soon as I heard it, I got it. And it was in my CD as I was going from Columbus to Cincinnati to Erie, all the stores we were opening. And that was the one. It was like, okay, where it's at. Like, it was almost like a theme song. Like, let's get the next one done. And as soon as I heard that song, when we built the store, it was like, we knew it was done. It was like, there's a lot of memories for me about why that was important. And that's one of them, right? Because I was in the middle of just a treadmill, really 7 days a week, because it was retail, and during the week you built it up. But that song just, that stuck with me a lot.
Again, going back to my lyrical analysis thing here, what I love about Beck was, I think between Where It's At and going back to Loser, he had a magnificent lyrical, in short spurts of lyrics, capability of capturing what the mood of the youth was at the time. I mean, I'm a loser baby, so why don't you kill me? Captures that thing about the disaffected youth of the era. And then he cuts to, sort of looking on the brighter side of Where It's At, and and what the youth is looking towards and turning towards. So brilliant lyricist as well as the music.
Here you go.
That's put that for me. Another great choice. All right, my last one. Again, I hope to turn everybody on to this. This is a band that everybody should have their two albums. They only had two albums. They only had two or three albums, but two of their albums are both on my top 100 of all time, especially the latter one. And I'm going to tell a story about somebody who I think is one of the most underrated performers of all time. Unfortunately, he passed away in his 50s just a couple of years ago. A Seattle rocker. I became acquaintance friendly with these guys. So if you go back to the early days of the grunge scene in Seattle, everything revolved originally around a band called Mother Love Bone, who also, if they weren't of that era, even though their album was really released during the Rock Love era. But another band I encourage everybody to know, go and get their greatest hits and know every song you can. Mother Love Bone was going to be Pearl Jam until the lead singer of the band, a guy by the name of Andy Wood, tragically passed away and committed suicide, and or by overdose, suicide by overdose, and that was it. And so Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard went off and formed Pearl Jam, and the drummer, a young man, really another dynamite sweetheart of a guy by the name of Regan Hager, went off and formed this band called Satchel, Satchel, with a guy who, like I said, I think is one of the most brilliant Elton John-like performers that I've ever come across, a guy by the name of Sean Smith. And they formed this band Satchel, and they had two amazing albums. But it's the second album that I want to focus on, an album called The Family, which I recommend everybody go, and it is on YouTube, so I'm looking at it on YouTube. Go and get and check out from start to finish. It is just one beautiful Elton John like ballad after another. But this guy has a very different lower voice with a beautiful tenor tone to it that is just heart melting, and the pain you can feel, and he was in pain. I mean, these guys had drug problems. I mean, I know because, like I said, I became somewhat acquainted with them. I mean, here's another band we saw at that club, The Edge in Palo Alto, which is now a grocery store. We saw them at the Fillmore on a Friday night. Amazing to see anybody at the Fillmore. And then they were in Palo Alto. And that was what was great back then, was they'd play San Francisco, then they'd play Palo Alto, then they'd play San Jose. So somebody like Collective Soul, you could see 3 nights in a row in the Bay Area, which was great.
You should talk about all the venues you went to. This probably, like, because you said now it's a grocery store. There's so many venues that people have gone to that are just so memorable, and they're gone. They're gone. Right?
No, in fact, you know what? I'm going to sidetrack for a second, and then I'll come back, because I was at the deli the other day, and Bobby Weir just died. For I don't know when people were watching this, but Bob Weir, the Dead, just died, and this guy was wearing this dead coat, and I said, "Beautiful Dead jacket you have on." It was puffy jacket and everything, and so we got into talking, and he says to me, he goes, "Well, how many times did you see the Dead, and what was your favorite show?" I said, "Well, I'm not a total Deadhead, but I saw them 10 or 12 times." I said, "But their show is on what I think with you or somebody else. I mentioned this as one of my favorite shows of all time on one of these podcasts. They played at Laguna Seca at the car racetrack in Northern California with Los Lobos opening for them. And this guy goes, "I was there," because he goes, "I've seen them 427 times." Yeah. Crazy shit. This guy like, just I don't even know why I sidetracked there. But anyways, because you said about the venues. So we were able to see these guys in San Francisco, and then in Palo Alto, and then Satchel and San Jose 3 nights in a row. And on the night in Palo Alto, they were going to come over to our house for dinner after the show. And so the show ends, and they come out and they said hi to us. And he goes, "Okay, let us just get our shit together, and then we'll go get dinner." 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes go by, 20 minutes go by. After about 20 minutes, Sean comes stumbling out of the back. I don't know what he did, and I never did heroin, so I don't know. But I would venture to say he was on something heavy, so much so. Sean Smith, who's the lead singer.
Keyboard guy too.
He's the keyboard guy too. He was so fucked up that they weren't going anywhere. Yeah, and then so then I turned to Regan Hagar and I go, "Hey, what you want to go outside and smoke a joint with us?" And he goes, "I can't. I'm on, he goes, I'm on probation or something for weed, and if I have to be tested regularly, and if it's caught in my system, I go straight to jail and bump to our Pasco." And I was like, "Oh God, you guys," but the nice guys. Then when I moved to Seattle years after Rock Love was gone, I would still see them at the Tractor Tavern and other clubs around Seattle. And like I say, Sean died tragically. I mean, I don't know, of a medical problem, I think, not a drug problem, but he was in his early 50s and he was overweight, so he wasn't healthy, smoker, the drug. So, but yeah, The Family by the band Satchel should be on everybody's regular rotation list. It's a beautiful album. It's beautiful to play at a cocktail hour in the background. It's beautiful to just listen to, like, put the headphones on and listen to and really soak up the sounds going on in there. And he has this richness, this deep, rich, low sounding richness to his voice that melts my heart to this day. And it's sad to think about that he's not there anymore to sing. He did on one of his last tours, which if you go look up Sean Smith Live, it's SHAWN, by the way, Sean Smith. He did a gorgeous, like 8-minute rendition of Purple Rain just on the piano. It was beautiful. And yeah, just beautiful man, beautiful artist, and a great band, Satchel, that I recommend to everybody. That's my final one.
You can't. I'm going to go back and listen to that. That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned all these players. You mentioned a few people like Stone Gossard, Gossard from Pearl Jam. They all had these side projects, and this isn't the band I'm going to talk about. But you reminded me of this because you turned me on to them.
Probably that Joseph.
Brad
season. Oh, Brad.
No,
Brad's not. So Sean Smith is the lead singer.
I know that's why I knew that because I was like, I remember you told me about that band in the 90s or whatever it was. But that was around that time, maybe a little before that. But and I was a huge Pearl Jam fan, which would have been my sixth, but they're just I don't know. They should be in that. They're not.
Regan Hagar is the drummer on those Brad albums too.
Regan Hagar, Keith was the bass player for a while.
He was the drummer for Satchel and for Mother Love Bone. So
I mean, these guys, they had some great, the whole Pearl Jam, Mad Season, Salvage, they were all mixed up in these great, sides projects, which were great. But I do remember Brad, and I do remember you telling me about that. I'm pretty sure.
There's a Brad song called, I think it's called "Isn't That Right?" or something like that. I mean, this whatever their big hit was. It comes across every time regularly on my playlist. Recommended stuff, and a great band. Yeah. So okay, what's your last one?
So my last one, again, when I thought about this, there were so many of them. I wanted to put Pearl Jam in because I love them so much, and I would again wait for every album to come out, but I wound up picking something. I wound up picking something that's pretty common, commercial band that you all know called Smashing Pumpkins,
which is a great choice.
And the Infinite Sadness album. I remember the CD was so cool because you opened it and it was multiple CDs. It was like not everyone had that CD, but he wanted it. And I remember I had it and I was sending it out to people to borrow, and I have to, when am I getting it back? Such a great album and such a great collection of songs. And again, during that whole time, just soundtrack of our lives, like I was listening to a lot of Smashing Pumpkins in those 96, 97, 98, all that, right? So that one for me is part of how just part of me, right? And the soundtrack of what I was going through at that time. It's just a great album. I recommend it. If you haven't listened to the whole thing, you should.
The whole thing. Right. It was a great tour. So we saw that. Really good. It was an amazing show.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, and that's just
Billy has a great podcast interview show he does now.
I know. I watch it once in a while. It's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's been interesting. Yeah, you have to watch that. Put the link for people. It's pretty good. He's got some really good interviews going on. Musicians to me, so it's good.
So yeah, what's up? Great choices. Good job, dude. Great choices.
This is fun. This is
really all right. Alrighty, so let's go in before we wrap it up for today. We'll go back into the studio and let's take a look at one of the old Rock Love magazines and what we were doing back then. Well, we were just talking about all of that, but let's see what the actual magazine looked like. So in May of 1998, that Rock Love Magazine episode with Nickelbag on the cover, Bernard Fowler and Stevie Salas, that was a great episode and a great issue of the magazine. When we look inside, wow, did we cover some great stuff. We are hitting full stride for Rock Love Magazine now, covering bands like Oasis. It was not the reunion, it was Oasis. And Corner Shop opened for them at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium in San Francisco. Chumbawamba at the Ghost of Twisted Past show in Chicago. Duran Duran, Art Alexakis, and Everclear. I mean, what a great show. And of course, never miss Yes with John Anderson, especially back in 1997 when they were at the Warfield in San Francisco, which holds only about 2,500 people. Van Morrison and Bob Dylan at the Fleet Center in Boston, Massachusetts. Wow, great shows we were covering back then. Blue Oyster Cult, Enough's Enough, a favorite of Rock Love Magazine during the time. And in the bookworm section of the magazine, something that really breaks my heart to this day, Andy Wood of Malfunction, had he not passed away, might have been the biggest rock star of the 90s. But he did pass away, and the members of Mother Love Bone and Malfunction, of which Andy Wood was the lead singer, went on to form bands like Satchel and Brad and Pearl Jam. Andy Wood would have been a huge star. And I was able to fulfill one of my dreams going into Rock Love Magazine. It took a couple of years to get there because now we are in the fourth year actually, of the magazine's existence. And I was able to speak with Roger Dean, the artist behind all those fabulous Yes albums. Robbie Robertson was also interviewed in that issue, and one of our biggest discoveries, a band that probably should have been in this episode that we were just talking about with Jeff Becker recently, and that is Long Pigs. I saw them open for the London Suede at the Fillmore in San Francisco, had time to spend with Crispin Hunt upstairs before the show, and what a beautiful band, what great songs. The guitarist of Long Pigs is now like the biggest crooner in all of Europe, Richard Hawley. I highly recommend you go check out Richard Hawley's recent work. That'll do it for today's Rock Love Magazine podcast, where we celebrate the magazine that ran between 1995 and 2001, looking at all the great music of the time, doing lists of our favorites as we did today, remembering the shows, the music, and the rock and roll history of all time, not just that time, and of course, looking to find the best new music today. So until I see you next time, friends, I'm Scott. Have a great day. This is the Rock Love Magazine Podcast.